You are listening to the Real Faith Stories podcast, interviews with people who chose to boldly follow their faith. I'm your host, Brian Robinson. Now, let's meet our guest and hear their story. Ben, it is a pleasure to have you on Real Faith Stories. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. I'm excited to share today and to hear from you as well.
I wanted to obviously dig into something you're known for, and that is as the lead guitarist for Skillet back in the day. And for those listeners who've never heard of Skillet or yourself, if you could share some of your backstory and then how you've moved over the years into this whole new venture with Skies Fall Agency, would love to hear more about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll start not too long ago, but back when I was younger in my prayer, kind of, 12, 13-year-old kid that was just trying to figure life out. I always prayed like God that you would use me in a big way. And I sincerely believed that I was meant to be a part of something that would impact the world for good. And, I even remember going up when people are like, do you feel called to the mission field? And I remember like going up to the front, but I'm like, I don't really feel called to go to Africa, but I know I'm supposed to do something, And Anyway, fast forward, I had the opportunity when I was 16 years old, which is just crazy now looking back at this, to try out for the band Skillet, which at that time was a tiny Christian rock band, a little bit obscure in the CCM kind of Christian music space. But I loved them. They were super passionate about the Lord, and I liked the music. It was kind of like harder rock type music. And at their concerts at that time, they would do altar calls, and it wasn't like everybody's eyes are closed, kind of slip your hand up. It was pretty radical. It was, if you want to make a stand for Jesus, like every eye's open, everyone's looking around at you, but like take a stand for God. And I thought that was so cool. And I'm like, I want to do that. I want to be a part of, whether it's, at that time, I'm a 15-year-old kid. I never thought I would be in my favorite band then. So I was like, God, if you could, I'd love to be a part of something like that. And sure enough, fast forward, I had the opportunity to try out for the band. But probably like a week or two before that, I remember practicing the guitar at that time. And I was pretty serious about practicing. My parents are classical musicians. My dad went to Juilliard, played in the symphony for years. So I kind of saw what it took to be a professional musician. And I was applying some of those things. But one day I was practicing and I felt like the Lord spoke to me that I was going to be in a band with John Cooper, who, was the singer from Skillet. And, kind of a strange thing to hear. And I'm like, I was kind of one of those, was that God or am I just crazy?
Right.
And sure enough, I had this opportunity to try out and it happened very quickly. I was this 16-year-old kid. I was homeschooled at the time. And so I had kind of an odd schedule anyway, and tried out. And literally 2 weeks later, I was out on tour with the band. And so it was one of those just very quick pivots to life. And I remember my very first tour was, I think I did 27 shows in like 30 days or something like that. And so I got thrown into the deep end when I was 16. And again, a small Christian rock band. And fast forward, we get signed to Atlantic Records and we crossed over into the mainstream space and did very well. I think Skillet's one of the largest crossover bands to exist, which is just amazing. And I think the biggest things for me was just the impact that we had on people, was creating content, being a part of media, that, we get messages from people saying, I've never heard of you guys before. I wasn't a Christian, but your song popped on the radio when I was literally going to commit suicide, or I was struggling with depression, and your song saved me, or made me realize God loves me for the first time in my life. So you hear things like that as a creative. And for me, I was like, I whatever this is, I want to do this the rest of my life. Like, I want to help people encounter God through the arts and through entertainment. And that's really what birthed Skies Fall. And so we call it Skies Fall Media Group, and it's very much an umbrella of all sorts of different entities within the arts and entertainment space. I did this when I was in the band, and it kind of took off. Like, we were doing a lot of music recording and production. I was producing and songwriting, and really just fell in love. I realized that I'm very entrepreneurial. So when you're in a band, you get to a certain level, you have a lot of free time, and there's only so many TV shows that you can watch on the bus before I was like, okay, it's time to be productive with some of this free time that I had. So I started starting businesses, and Skies Fall was one of those. So it's been an amazing journey. I was in the band for about 10 and a half years. And then probably the last few years, I felt this sense of my passion shifting. And we'd be playing a creation festival with 100,000 people, and literally we're headlining it. And I'd get back on the bus, and I found myself more excited about designing a business card for my Skies Fall company than I was about playing in front of 100,000 people. And I think that was the moment I realized maybe God's doing something else here, and so I ended up leaving the band after about 10 and a half years, like I said. And what's crazy is that it wasn't scary. It wasn't, I feel like I had this experience, and even though it was this amazing thing, it felt like a stepping stone. And it caused me to realize that God orchestrates our steps. And when we're faithful in a season, I was in that season, even though it was an amazing opportunity for me, it was very much serving the vision of John, the singer. And I think oftentimes in life, we find ourselves, we're in a position where we're not leading it necessarily. And we might have lots of vision for leading something, but there's a season of serving somebody else's vision. And I think as we're faithful in that, God then opens opportunities of what we're created for. And that was very much my experience with Skillet. And then transitioning to Skies Fall. I'll share one funny story. And when we're talking about, just faith and kind of believing God for big things, I remember we started doing video, and every week or so we'd pray for the company. It was myself and this guy, Joe, who I started the company with. And so one week we were praying and, believing God for big things. And I remember specifically we prayed, God, I just pray that you would open up opportunities with video and things like that. And so we bought a couple of video cameras, and literally that week we got phone calls from businesses saying, like, I heard you do video now. It was totally a God thing. And one of them was an apparel company that was nearly $1 billion apparel company. And somehow we got doing commercials for them. And so I remember sitting in the room with, the chief marketing officer of this nearly $1 billion company. And they're like, we're launching a product line with Target. This is what we think, but you guys are the professionals. What do you think? And I'm like Googling, like, what does a video producer even do? And just praying that God would give me something that means something to them. And so we didn't know what we were doing, but God gave us what we needed and really set us on that course, and it was amazing just to see kind of the journey there. So we spent a lot of time in the brand world doing branded content and working with people, kind of figuring out who you are, why do you exist, and how do you communicate that to the world. And I loved it for a while. And then at some point I realized we wanted to get more into the entertainment space and creating our own content where we decide the stories and we decide the platform where it's going. And so that shifted probably about 4.5 years ago to getting into film and TV, which is where I've been living most of the time now, is on the film and TV space.
Let me circle back in a couple of questions for you. Way back when you started with Skillet, what was the response of your parents when you got the job?
What's funny is people ask me that often. They're like, were your parents crazy? And they probably are a little bit crazy, but I think they saw the ministry aspect of the band. They knew we were kind of slightly related to the band as far as relationally through different churches. And so they were familiar with them and knew that they were solid people. It wasn't some like crazy rock band that's going to go off the deep end. But so they saw that, and I think they appreciated that. But it's funny. A 16-year-old homeschool kid, nonetheless. I see 16-year-olds now, and I'm just like, wow, I can't believe my parents let me do that. But my dad also left home when he was about 17 for music. So I think the apple didn't fall too far from the tree in that regard.
No, it didn't. What was one of the most challenging experiences you had on the road? Was it a consistent challenge, or was it something giant that happened that's really noteworthy? Yeah,
great question. There was the practical challenges as far as, driving it. What's funny is the first story I thought of was not very much a personal story, but I remember we have to drive ourselves back in the day. We had a van and trailer, and it was, you play a whole show, you pack up for hours and hours, and then it's 1 a.m. and you're like, all right, whose turn is it to drive to the next city? So I remember one time there was a massive snowstorm coming, and John, the singer, again, I was a 16-year-old kid driving this big van and trailer. So John, the singer, was very much like protective. He's like, are you going to be okay? I'm like, I'll be fine. He kept bringing it up over and over again. I was like, if we're meant to die, we're just going to, there's nothing we can do about it. I made some comment, go back into the gas station, finish pumping gas, come back out, and John's in the driver's seat. They wouldn't let me drive.
So much for Ben, the fatalist, right?
Exactly.
That's funny.
But, I think on a personal note, being in a band is really interesting. Like, you think that you're surrounded by people all the time, but it's actually a very lonely job, to be honest. It's you traveling with a small kind of core group of people, which is amazing. I think we had a really close relationship as a band, but I missed most of my best friends' weddings. I missed like so much of life kind of given to this mission. And that was really hard, to be honest. I don't think you realize it at the time because you're like, well, this is just what it is. But looking back on my 10 years in the band, I realized I missed so much of life. And that was hard for sure. And I think we had to kind of remind ourselves and remind myself why we're doing this. You get those messages, like I mentioned, from people impacted by the music. And that is kind of what got us through things and reminded us like, okay, we're about to leave for 3 months. Why am I doing this again? And you realize that when you're given to a mission, when you actually see that it's impacting people's lives, it becomes a bit more satisfying, and it doesn't cure the loneliness, but it helps you fight through it.
What was the biggest temptation you guys faced day after day?
It's interesting. People often ask us, how did you deal with pride? And especially as the band got bigger. And it's funny. And I think God prepares you for what he calls you to. And so, that, for instance, like, I don't see that as being a big temptation, I think, for us, because anytime there are moments of starting to think highly of yourself, God would find a way to kindly humble you. I remember one time we were opening for Creed, which at that time they were a big band, and all our friends were there. And I remember thinking a little bit of myself, I think, in that moment. And literally there's a recording of it. I'll have to send it to you. But I fell on stage and like, not just a little stumble, but like I rolled over, falling all over it was like probably like one of the most humiliating things ever, and I was like, that's funny that happened like shortly after I think of something of myself. I think also you realize that I'm kind of nothing. I'm just some kid that loves Jesus and wants to be used by him. And when that's your heart, you kind of realize like pride doesn't have a place there for you, and I think that's why relationship with each other in the band, and then also with local church, people that we look up to in life, those accountability people, that was so important, I think, for us as a band, because honestly, it's real out there on tour. You see those things.
What was one of the consistent prayers as a group you guys prayed every day or whenever you had the opportunity to minister?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just telling somebody this morning about this story, and we were talking about, actually it was Mary from Tribal, and we were talking about worship and how worship moments, and I was sharing my own kind of story of that, how we would play these big mainstream festivals and mainstream tours. We're playing in bars, we're playing kind of the edgiest of music festivals that there are.
Yeah.
And here we are, this Christian band kind of crossing over and whatever. And I would say that we would sneak in, we'd be like, all right, here's all the rock songs. And at the end, we would always try to throw in a worship song, which sounds crazy, but there was a song called Angels Fall Down that we would do often on tour. And I remember those being the most satisfying, because I think everybody in the band came from worship, either playing worship for church or worshiping a huge part of their life. Corey had a worship band before Skillet, and Jen came from a worship school, and John, worship was a massive part of his life, and for me as well. So I think the prayers for us were like, if we can create a context where the music that we're playing, it helps people encounter God in a very real way. I remember those were the things that we looked forward to when we prayed for, that people, whether you're a believer or you're not, that you would encounter God. And I remember distinctly some of these festivals that we played, and we were playing Angels Fall Down. And I remember looking out, and there was some guy, he's got his hands raised. He's got a cigarette in one hand, a beer in the other. He's obviously had some drinks, but he's crying and he's encountering God.
Yeah.
Those are the things that, again, we were like, if you could do more of that, God, if your spirit can go through our music and reach people, there's nothing more satisfying than seeing that and being a part of that,
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of Carla Pratico's interview several months ago. She was in a bar completely disconnected from the Lord, did not even know the Lord. And she heard the Holy Spirit say, "This is not your life." And she knew it was God. And she literally put her drink down and left, and then got into a cab. And in the cab drive, a husband and wife were driving the cab, and they led her to Christ in the cab.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And my point is, just like the guy smoking the cigarette and holding the beer up and worshiping God, he can get you anywhere. Isn't that wonderful?
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. I love hearing stories like that. It's so encouraging. You just realize God is so much bigger and maybe less religious. We think like you have to invite somebody to church for them to get born again. And it's like, no, like God's outside the four walls of the church and is actively pursuing people, reaching people. So I love that. I very much feel called to that. My wife and I have this company, Skies Fall, and in the entertainment space, that's our desire. We moved to Los Angeles 3 years ago, and it was a culture shock, to be honest. And not because everybody's around here is like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but like because it's just a different vibe, and Christianity looks and feels different as far as how people are outworking it. But at the same time, we've met some of the most amazing believers that we've known in our lives, and they're super solid of the Lord, moral people, integrous people, and are just feeling like they felt called to that. And so it's been exciting to us to kind of be on the front lines again of the entertainment of culture and of being a part of things and just building relationship with people. And it doesn't have to look like, hey, come to church on a Sunday for us to like minister to them. Like it could be out in our neighborhood or whatever, So yeah, I love that. It gets me excited.
So I'm going to circle back on when you got your first gig with video, and that was with a almost $1 billion company. And it sounds like when you were explaining it, you just had this sense, this is what I want to do, or this is what we should do. And you went ahead and bought the cameras, and then all of a sudden, God opened the doors for you. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right.
Has that been kind of a theme in your life, Ben, that you feel this kind of sense of direction and you just say, okay?
Yeah, it has. I've spoken in front of, not a whole lot, but I speak at churches sometimes. And often what I talk about is pursuing what God's called you to do in life and what that looks like. I think I've lived a pretty abnormal life. I never went to college. I barely finished my high school degree, and I'm in business and seemingly successful and doing some really cool things in that space. And people are often asking, how did you get there? And did you get a degree in this? And what does that look like? And honestly, I feel like the path I've taken and the pattern that I see is being faithful in something, like cultivating something that God's put in your hand, and fast forward and God using that or blessing that in some regard. I meet a lot of music artists along the way, and they're like, yeah, what do you call do? I'm called to do music. You play in front of thousands of people. I'm like, okay, that's amazing. So are you like writing songs, or, try to get to know like where this person is at in their journey. They're not practicing. They're not spending time cultivating the gift. They just feel this sense of, I'm called to do music. And candidly, I think most of the time, those types of people never really do anything in music, because I think they're waiting for this magical, miraculous moment when like the heavens open up and this door opens. And maybe that is somewhat of what happened to me with Skillet. But at the same time, there was years of practicing the guitar and years of seeking the Lord and kind of being prepared for that opportunity. So when that opportunity came, I had the skill set to actually kind of hang with that type of a group. I say this often about even graphic design. Like when I was in the band, I started doing graphic design, not because I felt like God said to, or, felt this sense from the Lord, this is what you're meant to do in life. I just got into graphic design because I thought it was cool. And I started a t-shirt company because I thought it was cool, but I took it very seriously. And I think there's definitely this sense of like, when we pursue something, like it's God honoring the work of our hands, as opposed to waiting for God to do something and we get to go on board with that, and it's a fine balance, because I think I've had to stop myself from pursuing something that I thought was God. And I can sense that it's me striving, or it's me trying to make something happen. And so you have to kind of constantly bring it back to the Lord to make sure that you're not just doing it out of your own strength, but you're cultivating something and then allowing God to open the doors, if those make sense. So
totally.
It's some semantics there, but that's just been a little bit of my experience.
You basically get enamored with working on your gift, but not striving in it.
Yeah, I think being okay with the process, being okay with the journey, even now, like I feel very much called to be a part of film and television. We've got a handful of projects that are being pitched and being looked at and things like that. But this is 4 or 5 years of going after this, learning the industry, building relationship, et cetera, et cetera. While I have this sense of this is what God's called me to do, I don't have a entitlement that says, like I've got this film idea and it better happen in the next 6 months. Otherwise I'm out, God. And it's more of like, I'm okay with the journey. Like, a general sense of this is what God's called me to do in life. Maybe that gets confirmed through other people sharing a prophetic word or something like that to me. I think I've realized, you look at Joseph in the Bible, like God gave him a dream, and where did that get him? It got him at the bottom of a pit. Then it got him in prison, all these different things. But in the end, God came through and he went through all the tests or whatever that he needed to go through. I think
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that process enough in my life to be okay with, I might have this desire to go do something. Someday my wife and I would love to have a restaurant. Maybe that's just a dream that never happens. I'm not really sure, but I'm okay with the 25-year process of collecting, information on it, knowledge, wisdom, resources, et cetera, to do something like that, as opposed to I feel called to do a restaurant and I'm going to do it tomorrow. And if it doesn't happen, then I'm going to be bitter at God. I think I see that often with people, and I think just be okay with the process of it. Realize that it is a process, that maybe God's put something in your heart that's not for tomorrow, but it's for 10 years from now. But what are you going to do today in the next 10 years to cultivate that, to prepare not just the skill set, but your heart to be in a position where when that opportunity does come up, you're ready and you're prepared for it, as opposed to just waiting around for something to happen and you maybe don't have the skill set to actually be that person, if that makes sense.
It does. As you walk through this process of cultivating, how do you nurture that in prayer? What do your prayers look like when you're wanting to nurture that gift?
Brian, that's a great question. Wow. I'm not sure. I think there's a sense of that God would use this, like whatever this thing is that I'm putting my hand to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like, I was looking at my Enneagram thing the other day and I thought I was a 1, but I took a test a few years ago and it said I was a 5, which it has to do with being capable, being somebody that's intentional. And I'm not super into the whole Enneagram thing, but there was something that I was kind of sharing with that it spoke to me about that was basically like, I have this desire to be not just capable, but to be the person that make something happen. That's what is just ingrained in me. And so my prayer often is that God would just use the thing that I put my hand to, that God would use me. I feel like I don't really know all the ways and all the outlets that God might be looking to use me. So rather than spreading myself thin, trying to make something happen, I think my prayer is, God, if you can, even, a daily prayer that I have is, God, if you can use me however you want to use me, the opportunities, these divine moments that I'm in a coffee shop line and I share something encouraging with the person behind me, or I'm on a business email and I just feel this sense of whatever, encouraging somebody. I want to be so open to those things and whatever those gifts that I might have, it's maybe isn't like a big plan. It's just being sensitive to the Spirit in those tiny moments. And I don't want to overlook that because it's so easy for me to do that. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but a little bit more insight maybe.
And what just springs to mind is life is made of moments. It's one moment after another, and being open-handed and willing can make an incredible life, can't it?
Yeah.
Another question that sprung to mind here is, when you pray with your spouse, do you find that the way you approach a specific prayer is a little different in terms of the aspect that you pray about versus hers, and vice versa?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
What are you finding in general? I can share from my perspective. I'm more direct about, Lord, please do A, B, and C. And my wife is more about, well, let's pray into the relationships with A, B, and C.
I think I could probably relate to that.
So it gives me a whole nother better perspective. I get more of a 360 view instead of a 180,
Yeah, that's really good. It's really good.
What is it that right now that you're seeking the Lord about? Is there something that is really front and center for you guys?
And I think the biggest thing is we kind of roll in a lot of different circles and we have our hands in a lot of different things, which is exciting. For an entrepreneur, it gives us the opportunity to work in different industries. I'm involved with Tribal with Mary as well and launching this music worship streaming app. And within that, we're launching a record label as well. So Tribal Records will be a thing in the next kind of few months here that I'm helping with.
Wonderful.
And then Skies Fall and these film and TV aspects of things. And so I often find myself spread thin on different opportunities. And so my prayer is just that I actually prayed it this morning with my wife, and that's just that the wrong doors would close because there's a lot of opportunity. And I think for me, if there's anything I've prided myself in is that I can kind of throw in and help people in lots of different areas, which is great. That's a great gift. I love serving people's visions and coming alongside helping people succeed. And as your circle grows, the needs grow, and you make a lot more friends, and they all have needs, which is super exciting. But at the same time, we can often feel like, is this just spinning my wheels? Or are we actually doing something that's helping
Oh,
people?
yeah.
And so that's my prayer, is just that I don't want to get to the end of my life and realize I did 100 things, but like 80 of those weren't really God. They were me doing something that I thought was cool, you know?
Come on.
I want to be more condensed and make sure that the litmus test of like, is this God, is really, I want that to be an important test that things pass before I spend significant time on them.
Yeah. As you've gone in and out of all these different circles over the years, what would be, in your opinion, one of the most important pieces of advice you could give somebody who's got these desires and dreams inside of them, but they have not felt like they should take a step forward, or they're afraid to take a step forward? What would be your thoughts on that?
I look at my life and maybe some of my friends' lives as well, and I realized that I'm okay with failing. Like, I'm okay with going after something and it didn't work out. And I'm like, I learned something. Not everyone's okay with that. I think a lot of people, they're like, if I go after starting a coffee shop and it fails, that I'm a failure in life and that's it. Like, it's final. And I'm a learner by nature. And so I just like learning things and learning mistakes and learning. So I've become okay with that process. And so I think realizing that, again, that life is a journey. It's not just if this thing doesn't work out, that I'm done for. That you start to maybe risk in a different way. You start to go after things I'm excited about this and I believe God's in this, but if it doesn't work out, I'm okay with that. And I still have the Lord and life is still good. If that becomes how you approach lots of different things in life, then there's a lot less pressure. Kind of diffuses that fear that I think a lot of people have of, if I believe God for being an artist or a musician and it doesn't work out, I'm going to be disappointed. So I think we just have to kind of adjust our expectations and things, but going after things, there's nothing more exciting to me than like opportunity and going after that opportunity with other people, helping other. So, talking to you, Brian, where do you want to go? Oh, I want someday this podcast is a TV show. My knee-jerk reaction is, who do I know that can help Brian get to that space? If there's a gift maybe that I have, it's faith, not just for myself, but it's for other people and what they're called to do. And if I can spur you on to take a few steps in that to overcome those fears, then I feel like I've done my job. I feel like I've fulfilled kind of the calling that's in my life.
One of my friends, Luke, said, if the light's green, go. And if the light's red as you're moving forward, then it's time to stop.
My dad would say something very similar to that. And it's just that, especially in trying to figure out, is this God, is this not God? And my dad would always say, it's a green light until it's a red light. It's pretty much the same thing. And that really helped me in life to figure out, we get so caught up in, is this the will of God? And I think that he loves us enough to let us know, if our heart is to serve him, our heart is pure. I think he wants us to go after things. He created, we were his kids. Like, he gave us the whole earth to cultivate and make something of that. And we get so hung up as believers sometimes and like, I don't know if this is right or no. And it's like this battle that, like, as a believer, I'm just given to trying to help people overcome. And I'm like, God wants you to go after things that are in your heart. Like, he gave you the desires of your heart. And as we seek him, as we delight ourselves in him, he actually wants to meet those desires that he gave you in the first place. So I love it. I get passionate about that. I want to help people kind of unlock that maybe misnomer about what you're called to do in life.
This brings up an experience I had. I've shared this once or twice before on other podcast episodes, but I was sitting with a friend of mine and he said to me, Brian, I think what you need to understand is, instead of asking the Lord all the time, what do you want? Which is a good thing. He's asking you, what do you want? In other words, he will partner with you. I had someone else say, you can go through door 1, 2, or 3. It doesn't matter. He's going to show up. It's hard to receive that when you're used to thinking there's only one way. And because of that, I'm going to make a mistake. It goes back to your discussion about just try something. And it's not, you're not going to die if it doesn't work, I hope. You've learned something, right?
Yep. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I think often the things that I learn in different industries, I come back and apply those things to maybe the main thing. My main thing would probably be Sky's Fall. But what I'm doing with Tribal, I learn things every day, and I come back and apply those things to Skies Fall in the entertainment space. And so
Great.
I think, just being okay with, like, we get so rigid and we about things sometimes. And I think just being okay with the fluidness of it all, that's kind of opened me up to, now I'm not always in that space, but that if I can come back to that place of being flowing with the Spirit and being okay with the way that God moves in life, then I think it's more of a grace-filled life as opposed to a kind of like, it has to look this way, otherwise I'm out.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's a great point. On that note, I'd love for you to pray for our listeners as we finish up, please.
Absolutely. Well, God, we just love you so much. And I just thank you for this opportunity just to share my story and my journey. And I just pray that your voice would speak through these stories, that your voice would just speak to those that are maybe timid about pursuing something or fearful that they might have a desire to go after something, but they don't know that it's from you, or they're nervous about it. I just pray that the things that I shared today would diffuse those fears, and that every listener would feel unlocked and given permission to go after things, that they would feel that sense of a green light in their hearts with the things that they and ultimately believe you've given them. And so I just pray for faith to be stirred, for faith to be birthed within people's hearts and desires. And that, coming out of this, we would hear testimony of people having heard this podcast and gone after something, and God blessing that, and God confirming those things in different ways. So we just commit all these things to you, God. We're here to further your kingdom. We're here to be just ambassadors of your grace, your gospel. And it's a privilege to do that. And so we just say thank you, and thank you for this time. Amen.
Thank you, Ben. So good to have you on the program.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. Please make sure you subscribe to the show and share this with someone you believe would be encouraged and motivated by these stories. Until next time, I'm Brian Robinson, reminding you that the greatest decision you could ever make is to ask Jesus Christ to become the Lord of your life. If you haven't done that, read Romans chapter 10, verses 9 through 11. Thanks again for listening.